April 1st, 1944, Assam, India. The air was thick, suffocating, not just with the humid heat of the Brahmaputra Valley, but with the clatter, the diesel fumes, and the desperate energy of Chabua Air Base. Everything here moved with a brutal, relentless rhythm. This was the staging ground for the most hazardous, little-known mission of the Second World War, the Hump. Ahead of them lay the Himalayas, not the majestic peaks of tourist fantasy, but a chaotic, lethal wall of rock and ice, perpetually shrouded in storm systems that devoured man and machines whole. Below, 100 miles deep into the jungles of Burma, Japanese patrols waited like hungry ghosts. Second Lieutenant Travis Dusty Rhodes wiped the sweat from his eyes, the salt stinging. He was 24. A kid from Kansas who'd never seen a hill until he saw mountains that scraped the stratosphere. Today, he was prepping his C-47 Skytrain, call sign Thunderhead 36. His cargo, 8 tons of high-octane aviation fuel, and, strapped securely behind the cockpit, a small, heavily guarded crate stamped with a simple, chilling label, Project Beetle. The plane groaned under the weight. The engines coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life, a sound that, to the ground crew, was less a promise of flight and more a defiant shout against the inevitable. Every pilot knew the odds. The route, the air supply line to Chiang Kai-shek's forces in China, was a graveyard. They flew without radar, without reliable weather data, and sometimes without enough fuel to turn back. This wasn't flying. It was a desperate gamble against geography. By 1944, the losses were staggering. The Chinese called it the Aluminum Trail. The pilots called it the Sky Road to Hell. An average of 1 plane vanished per day. They didn't crash in a way that left recognizable wreckage. They simply vanished, swallowed by the sheer size of the mountains, disintegrated by violent downdrafts, or flash frozen into the glaciers. The official record kept it simple: lost in action, LIA. No bodies, no wreckage, no questions asked. This was the core secret the U.S. government needed to keep buried: the casualty rate. If the public knew the cost of keeping the Chinese theater alive, a cost often paid by young pilots flying blindly into 20,000-foot peaks, support for the war would waver. The missions were classified, not just for what they carried, but for the sheer recklessness of the operation. Travis felt the vibration through his seat, a constant low-frequency tremor that settled deep in his bones. The co-pilot, Benny Miller, was unusually quiet. Benny had seen a C-87 Liberator Express, fully loaded with $500,000 in gold bullion, take off last week, heading into a snow squall. It had never radioed again. The gold was secondary. The silence was the terror. "Tower, this is Thunderhead 36. Ready for taxi." Travis's voice crackled, trying to sound calm. A clipped reply came back. "Thunderhead 36, cleared to runway 27. Priority cargo means priority clearance. Get it wheels up, Lieutenant." The subtle emphasis on priority was the only reminder of the crate bolted just feet behind them. What was in it? No one knew. Rumors ranged from parts for the Manhattan Project to simply more money than God. As they lifted off, the runway below quickly dissolved into the green monotony of the jungle. They began the slow, torturous climb towards the first pass. Soon the air would turn thin, icy, and treacherous. Travis checked his watch, 0830 hours. He had a 4-hour window to cross the mountains and deliver Project Beetle to Kunming. 4 hours, or he would join the ghosts. The true secret of the hump wasn't the gold or the sensitive documents. It was the moral calculus that deemed the cargo more valuable than the lives delivering it. And that secret was about to be exposed high above the clouds. The climb was relentless, a battle against gravity and a failing mixture control. The C-47 was a workhorse, not a mountain climber. It labored, straining against the thinning air. Outside, the world was no longer green. It was an ominous, bruised palette of gray and white. "Altitude reading, Benny," Travis yelled over the roar of the engines. 17,000, Captain, getting choppy." Benny's voice was tight. He pointed to the wings where small sheets of ice were beginning to form, catching the faint light. They were flying into what the locals called the weather box, a place where storms materialized instantly, where the jet stream slammed into the static continental air masses. It was here, in this invisible, lethal space, that the command's real gamble was exposed. The War Department, desperate for supplies to stem the Japanese advance, had forced the pilots to fly above the designated safe cruising altitude, up to 20,000 feet, to clear the highest peaks and save fuel. But the C-47s were unpressurized and barely equipped for it. Every flight was a flirtation with hypoxia. Travis reached for the oxygen mask, the rubber suddenly feeling cold and alien against his face. He checked the plane's position. They were nearing the dreaded Salween River Gorge, a canyon so deep that downdrafts could rip a plane apart in seconds. This was where most of the aluminum ghosts resided. Suddenly, the world turned white. The cockpit was engulfed by blinding snow, an immediate whiteout. It was the meteorological equivalent of a sneak attack. Damn it, where did that come from? Travis fought the controls, his knuckles white. The plane shuddered violently, dipping sharply. The altimeter spun. "I lost 3,000 feet in less than a minute, sir," Benny screamed. "I can't see the wingtip." This was the terrifying reality of high-altitude mountain flying. Pilots couldn't trust their eyes. They had to rely entirely on the instruments, which, in the intense magnetic fields of the region and the extreme cold, often failed or gave wildly inaccurate readings. Many pilots, victims of spatial disorientation, flew straight into the mountains, mistakenly believing they were pulling up. Travis struggled to maintain a consistent heading. He banked left, trying to follow the rough track they had been given. He knew the protocol. If you couldn't see, you had to climb above the storm. But climbing meant burning precious fuel they might need for the emergency landing they were mentally preparing for. Then came the static, a harsh grinding sound that shredded the radio communication. Travis furiously adjusted the frequency. Nothing. "Benny, get on the emergency band. Try to raise command," Travis ordered. Benny's hands moved quickly, desperately on the radio dials. "Negative, sir. The whole band's dead. I think the storm is kicking up too much ionization. We're alone." The silence of the radio was the cruelest sound of all. It meant the vast, terrifying world outside had officially cut us off. No one knew where they were. No one was tracking them. If they went down, the official report would simply read, "Lost contact." In the cargo bay, the Project Beetle crate, secured by heavy-duty straps, sat inert and silent, its importance mocking the fragility of the men struggling to keep it airborne. The value of its contents, whatever it was, outweighed their existence. Travis felt a cold dread settle in, worse than the mountain air. He was a small, expendable piece of a very large, secret puzzle. He pulled the yoke back, trying to gain altitude against the storm's brutal will. The C-47 responded sluggishly. He knew he had to break through the cloud layer quickly, or the downdrafts would have their way. What they didn't know was that just ahead, a single unforeseen element, a sudden shift in wind that command hadn't predicted, was about to change their destiny and the secrecy of the entire hump operation forever. The struggle continued for 30 agonizing minutes. The engines screamed, laboring under the twin burdens of altitude and severe icing. Travis was flying by sheer instinct now, trusting the feel of the machine over the flickering instruments. He was deep into enemy territory, the skies technically claimed by the Japanese, though the weather itself was a far deadlier adversary. Finally, with a gut-wrenching lurch, they punched through the cloud layer. Above them, the sky was a deep, crystalline blue, sun-drenched and peaceful. Below, the storm looked like a swirling, angry ocean. It was a momentary reprieve, a false sense of security. "We're above the weather, sir. Altitude 21,500, Benny reported, his voice shaky with relief. Travis didn't celebrate. He looked out and felt a wave of nausea. Instead of the gentle slopes he expected, they were terrifyingly close to a colossal, snow-covered peak. They had been blown dangerously off course. He checked the map. This was not a known pass. They were flying blind over an uncharted section of the Hengduan Mountains. "We're too close, too damn close." Travis yanked the stick, banking the heavy plane hard to the right. The C-47 groaned in protest. It was in that split second, as the plane turned, that it happened. A sound like a thunderclap, but sharper, metallic, followed by a violent, catastrophic vibration. The plane was immediately filled with the smell of burning oil and jet fuel. "Engine 2 is gone," Benny shouted, pointing to the right wing where the propeller was now windmilling uselessly, trailing black smoke. A massive chunk of ice, or perhaps a stressed section of the wing structure, had been violently thrown into the engine cowling. Travis fought the controls, trying to compensate for the sudden asymmetrical thrust. The plane was a brick now, heavy and uncooperative. He knew they couldn't maintain altitude on one engine, not at this height, not with this load. "Mayday, Mayday, Thunderhead 36 is going down, single engine failure, altitude 21,000, unknown coordinates. We have Project Beetle cargo, repeat, Project Beetle." Travis's voice was desperate, punching the emergency button and praying the signal would get out before they hit the ground. The message, brief and urgent, shot out into the static. It was intercepted not by command in Chibua, which was still blocked by the storm, but by a clandestine U.S. signals outpost hidden deep in the Burmese jungle, run by the Office of Strategic Services, OSS. Their mission was to monitor Japanese communications, but their high-gain antenna picked up the distress call. OSS operative, First Lieutenant Kai Shen, a Chinese-American cryptographer, was the only one in the hut. He wrote the message down instantly, the words, Project Beetle, flashing like an alarm bell in his mind. He knew enough of the rumors to understand the severity. This wasn't just another plane. This was a national security catastrophe. On board Thunderhead 36, the end was fast approaching. Travis pitched the nose down slightly, desperately trading altitude for airspeed, looking for any flat patch of ground. Below, through a fleeting break in the cloud, he saw it. A small, desolate plateau. Too small, too uneven, but it was their only chance. "Strap in, Benny. We're going in hard." The last thing Travis saw was the looming, jagged shadow of the mountain. The last thing the OSS outpost heard was the final tearing sound of the radio transmitter failing, followed by absolute silence. The signal was lost. The plane and its secret cargo were gone. But now one person, an operative in the field, knew what was lost and when it was lost, a crucial detail that the brass would soon go to extreme lengths to silence and forget. 24 hours after the distress call, Chibua Air Base, India. The atmosphere at command was a toxic mix of panic and calculated denial. The status report on Thunderhead 36 was simple. Overdue, presumed lost. This was routine for the hump. What was not routine was the single fleeting distress signal mentioning Project Beetle. Colonel Walter Hayes, a man whose entire career was built on order and secrecy, received the internal OSS report detailing the intercepted Mayday call. His reaction was immediate and decisive: containment. The existence of Project Beetle and the disastrous failure to protect it could not reach Washington, let alone the press. Hayes summoned Major Finn O'Malley, a grizzled veteran of the Pacific Theater, known for his discretion and his ruthless efficiency. O'Malley's new mission was simple: find the wreckage, secure the cargo, and silence the signal. "Major," Hayes' voice was low, heavy with threat, You will deploy a small, untraceable unit. You are not looking for survivors. You are looking for a black box, the flight recorder, and the crate marked Beetle. This must look like a routine salvage mission for a lost hump transport. No one outside this room is to know the true nature of the cargo. Hayes handed O'Malley a single sheet of paper. It detailed the estimated coordinates, triangulated from the faint signal received by the OSS. The area was hostile, deep in the mountainous no-man's land between China and Burma, controlled sporadically by both Japanese patrols and various indigenous tribes fiercely resistant to outsiders. A mission into this region was, quite literally, a suicide run. Meanwhile, back at the hidden OSS outpost, Lieutenant Kai Shen knew he was sitting on explosive material. The official radio traffic from Chibua was deafeningly silent on the subject of Project Beetle, focusing instead on fictitious weather patterns and pilot error. He understood the cover-up had already begun. Shen, a man driven by duty, faced a moral dilemma: report the truth and risk being labeled a security threat, or bury the evidence and protect his career. He chose a middle path. He meticulously copied the coordinates and the cryptic Project Beetle reference onto a personal coded notepad, tucking it deep inside his kit. He had planted a time capsule of truth. O'Malley and his four-man team, dressed in unmarked gear, were dropped by parachute 5 days later, hundreds of miles from the nearest friendly outpost. They descended into a landscape of overwhelming silence, a silence broken only by the thin whistling wind and the crunch of their boots on the icy scree. They were hunting a metal needle in a granite haystack. The true peril wasn't the Japanese, it was the vast, indifferent landscape itself, and the moral weight of their orders. O'Malley knew his true objective wasn't salvage. It was to erase a piece of history before history could record it. He pushed his men onward, the air growing thinner, the temperature dropping with the fading light. He knew they were dangerously close to the last reported coordinates. Soon they would find the aluminum ghost, and the secret of Project Beetle would finally be revealed. The question was, who would find it first? The Americans, the Japanese, or the mountains? 6 days after the crash, 18,000 feet, Hangduan Mountains. Major O'Malley's team moved like shadows across the snow. The altitude was exhausting, turning every uphill step into a desperate fight for oxygen. They followed the faint, broken trail of pulverized tree line and disturbed rock. Then they saw it. Half buried in a deep snowdrift, scattered across a forbidding, narrow plateau, was the wreckage of a C-47. The plane had impacted violently, but miraculously the cockpit section was relatively intact, cleaved from the fuselage like a wound. The silence here was absolute, sanctified by tragedy. O'Malley scanned the site. No signs of Japanese activity, but no signs of the crew either. He and his men began the grim work of salvage. They found Second Lieutenant Rhodes, the pilot, swamped over the controls, still strapped in. His face was frozen, etched with the final moment of pure, focused determination. Rhodes hadn't panicked. He had tried to save the plane. In the wreckage, they found the flight recorder, the black box. It was an orange steel sphere, scorched but structurally sound. The memory of the plane's final desperate minutes, the scream of the dying engine, the crackle of the Mayday call, the pilot's final words was preserved inside this small, dense container. O'Malley secured it instantly. The primary objective was complete. Then the focus shifted to the cargo bay. The fuselage was split open, exposing the contents to the brutal elements. Most of the aviation fuel drums were ruptured and frozen. But there, protected by heavy steel reinforcing brackets, was the small, unmarked wooden crate. Project Beetle. O'Malley and his team worked quickly, using pry bars to break open the lid. Inside, nestled in layers of heavy cotton batting, was not a weapon schematic, nor a new form of radar, nor gold. It was a collection of meticulously documented hand-drawn maps and geological samples. These weren't war materials, they were a blueprint for the future. The maps detailed the precise locations of rare earth minerals, tungsten, uranium, and key components for high-tech electronics in the Chinese interior, minerals essential for the next generation of American weaponry and energy. The C-47 hadn't been carrying the secret weapon. It was carrying the key ingredients to build the secret weapon. The information was strategically priceless, its loss a genuine threat to Allied superiority after the war. As O'Malley studied the documents, the true horror of the cover-up solidified. The men who flew the hump weren't just supplying a theater of war, they were running a covert resource extraction operation, using military necessity as cover for a long-term strategic advantage. The lives of Rhodes and Miller were deemed expendable not for a single battle, but for a global economic edge that would last for decades. Suddenly, a crackle of static broke the silence. The wind carried the faint sound of voices. Not American, not Chinese, but Japanese. A patrol, drawn to the sound of the crash or simply scouting, was approaching. O'Malley had minutes, maybe seconds, to complete his mission. He had the box, the evidence, and the maps. He faced the final, grim order. Secure the area. The secret couldn't be traced back to this spot. Major O'Malley's team fought a desperate, rapid engagement against the small Japanese patrol. They were outnumbered but had the element of surprise. The objective wasn't victory, but escape and concealment. O'Malley succeeded, securing the Project Beetle contents and the black box. Before evacuating, under the cover of a sudden snow squall that used carefully placed explosives to collapse the cliff face onto the main wreckage, burying the C-47 deep beneath thousands of tons of rock and ice. Thunderhead 36 was gone, erased from the immediate physical world, replaced by a fresh, anonymous scar on the mountainside. O'Malley returned to command a week later, delivering the maps and the black box directly to Colonel Hayes. The cover-up was perfected. The black box was immediately placed under lock and key, its recording officially damaged and unreadable. Rhodes and Miller were given posthumous generic commendations for flying with courage in the face of extreme weather. The casualty lists were updated, the loss normalized. The aluminum trail continued to claim its victims, and the high-risk hump flights continued to keep the minerals and the secret flowing. For the next 6 decades, the story of Thunderhead 36 was a ghost story whispered only among the oldest hump veterans. The truth began to surface only in the early 2000s. With the declassification of OSS files and the gradual release of World War II-era records, historians and specialized search teams began to piece together the fragments. They found the coordinates logged by Lieutenant Shen, the coded notes, and finally the internal memos detailing the extraordinary retrieval priority assigned to a single lost aircraft. It was a retired U.S. Army veteran and amateur archaeologist, Dr. Alan Pierce, working with a satellite imaging company, who finally located the site in 2004. Using advanced ground-penetrating radar on the specific coordinates Shen had logged, Pierce identified the massive debris field beneath the collapsed cliff. When an expedition team finally reached the site and began digging, the recovery was astonishing. They found the remains of the plane, and crucially, evidence of the hasty, deliberate cover-up, the explosive residue, the lack of personal effects, and the telltale signs of a professional salvage operation. The ultimate breakthrough came in 2008, when following years of pressure, the National Archives quietly released the recording from the long-classified black box of Thunderhead 36. The recording, once deemed unreadable, was perfectly clear. The world finally heard the final desperate plea of Lieutenant Travis Rhodes. Mayday, Mayday, Thunderhead 36 is going down. We have Project Beetle cargo. Repeat, Project Beetle. The message was no longer a fragment of static. It was a voice from the grave. confirming the espionage, the high-stakes trade of human life for strategic materials, and the institutional decision to bury the truth for 60 years. The top-secret cargo plane hadn't just vanished, it had been erased. The revelation of Project Beetle and the intentional cover-up forced a stark reevaluation of the entire hump operation. The pilots were not just heroes, they were unwitting pawns in a long-game intelligence operation designed to secure U.S. industrial dominance long after the war was over. The aluminum trail claimed over 1,600 men and 600 aircraft, a casualty rate higher than many frontline combat units. But the names of the lost pilots, like Rhodes and Miller, are no longer simply etched on memorials. They now carry a footnote of tragedy, sacrificed not for an immediate military victory, but for a global strategic advantage. Today, the remnants of the hump are scattered across the highest, most remote regions of the Himalayas. You can almost hear the ghost engines still straining against the wind. The mountains hold the secrets, keeping them until technology or conscience is ready to find them. The story of Thunderhead 36 serves as a sobering reminder that in the Shadow War, the war of intelligence, espionage, and resources, the cost of secrecy is often paid in the highest currency, the truth, and the lives of the men sworn to uphold it.